this is the opportunity for us to lean in and speak on behalf of the sector, or to be able to ramp up our advocacy efforts, because it will change the minds of whether it's a senator or a governor or someone that we're speaking with, who can actually help us to bring our voice through them.
Welcome to the PM Podcast, brought to you by DonorSearch, the show that takes you inside the lives of thought leaders, innovators, and changemakers in fundraising, philanthropy, and civil society. I'm your host, Jay Frost. Roger Ali is chair of the AFP Global Board and one of the most respected voices in nonprofit leadership. With more than 2 decades in the field, he has led teams that have raised over $150 million through transformative capital campaigns and major gift strategies. Holding senior roles at Niagara Health Foundation, Hamilton Health Sciences Foundation, and the Bishop Strachan School Foundation. Today, Roger is an independent consultant specializing in governance, major gifts, campaign strategy, and staff development. He also serves as senior associate with Sutton Associates, advising nonprofits across the sectors. A lifelong champion of ethical and inclusive philanthropy, Roger sits on the boards of Imagine Canada and has held numerous leadership roles with AFP, including past chair of the AFP Foundation for Philanthropy Canada and president of the AFP Golden Horseshoe Chapter. We spoke with him about his personal and professional journey and how it led to his role in chairing the world's largest fundraising association today. Well, I do want to ask you about your own beginnings, not just in this profession, not just that part, but you. For people who don't know Roger, where does your story begin? I understand your family is originally not from Canada, but is it from Nicaragua?
No, that's interesting because Nicaragua is a country I studied when I was in geography in grade 12, but I'm from the West Indies.
Okay.
So not even close. Not even close. So I was born in Trinidad, so I'm an Indo-Caribbean Canadian, if that's sort of the proper sort of description. And my family came to Trinidad from India. So that would be, I believe it's my great-grandfather who came over as an indentured laborer. So at the time, they were bringing these individuals essentially to be slaves to work on the sugar plantations in the Caribbean and in Trinidad in particular, because the country had such rich natural resources, both in oil and sugarcane plantations. So that's my home country and where my family is from or were born, and that's where I was born and grew up. Until I was 15, and it was sort of around that age that I made the decision actually to come to Canada. So that's kind of how it started, and I wouldn't have decided to come to Canada or leave my family, but I was just intrigued by a first visit with my mom to Canada, and I think it was just more of the attraction of Hamilton, where I currently live. So that's sort of in a nutshell, how this all came about. Never been to Nicaragua, though, Jay.
I don't know where that came from. That's the dangers of research.
That's all right.
I'm glad to know the real story. So you were quite young when you made that visit with your mother. What prompted the visit to Hamilton?
Yeah, she was visiting one of her close cousins and thought it would be kind of neat to bring me along. Because I was one of 2, siblings, and my other sibling was much younger. So, I came with her on this trip and was just sort of quite intrigued by McMaster University, and I think it's just more so the city itself, because I had never been to North America before. I had traveled to other places, primarily in the Caribbean. And this was kind of my first, shall we say, big trip. And it just opened my eyes more so about, I was intrigued by the vibrancy of the city, the university, the campus, the layout. I think it was more that. And I think I've always been, a global citizen, if you will. So I think deep down inside, whether my mother knew it or not, that, this was kind of my first step to bigger and better things that I had planned for myself.
So tell me about your family, about your parents. So what kind of work did they do? Because you mentioned being kind of a global citizen. So that thinking sometimes arises naturally in person, but sometimes it's also exposure. What was your family like?
Yeah, we're definitely a very close-knit family. My mom was a nurse, and I think that certainly, I would say, influenced my career and the fundraising that I did, because half of my career, the latter half, was in healthcare philanthropy. But I think during her time, that wasn't the norm to be a professional and to, go to college and become a nurse and really follow that path. And my dad was an accountant, and he worked at one of the oil companies. So they both worked in the same roles for their entire careers. So I would say definitely, middle class professionals. And I think what I loved about my family is just that sense of, I felt like I belonged because they made sure, we had all of the things we needed. And in as kids, it's like, of course, I might be dating myself here when I say, I was like 10 when I got my first sort of RCA TV in my bedroom. It was this sort of red, well, now it's like this red, like this space, like sort of heavy machine that was sitting on a table. But that at the time, I mean, that was pretty exciting, to have your own TV. And so things like that, and the ability to, travel and go to restaurants and things like that. I mean, all of those things, we had those rich experiences. And I really feel that it shaped who I am today, and what I do and how I feel, and my culture. The culture then has translated into, it's almost like in your DNA, and what you do, and the things you appreciate, and where my life took me after I left there.
I know that with many people I speak with, there's a moment where they're involved with, I don't know, a church or synagogue or a mosque or something, or they've seen their parents volunteering in some organization. With two professional parents, you may have seen a lot of that, or you may not, because they must have been working pretty hard as a nurse and an accountant. But did you have exposure to the organizations outside of work that kind of gave you a hint as to the kind of work that you do today?
Yeah, that is such a great question, because we made time, and it was part of our weekly lives to go to church and to be involved and volunteer. And I really feel that has shaped my career. So we religiously went to church on a Sunday, and as Pentecostals, it was long services. It wasn't sort of, your 1 hour. I remember sometimes it would take, 2 hours. And I was very much involved in Sunday school and learning all of the books in the Bible, and being able to recite them and participate in, concerts, and to write articles about, your personal beliefs once you've read a chapter or a verse. So all those things were part of our, I would say, upbringing, and certainly volunteering. And I didn't fully appreciate it at the time, but as you asked me, to reflect on this, I think back of, we were involved as kids to help and feed individuals who were homeless. And I remember that, my parents would bring packages of food to these homeless individuals, or the home for the aged, as it was called. And we would actually give each, you know, whether it's a retiree or an elderly person, money. I remember my mother would, give us the money, and we had to hand it out. I remember I had to give it to each person, or I was, encouraged and put to the forefront. So, those things, even in those formative years, did absolutely shape my thinking, and more importantly, the career that I chose, not realizing it at the time.
I know that those things can sometimes stick with a person for a long time. Do you still have moments where you kind of draw from those memories, or they just kind of arrive? Because I know that for me, even the church things that you mentioned, if I start to hear a few bars of a piece that I remember as an acolyte, it's in there. The whole thing comes back.
It does. It's things like Amazing Grace every time I hear that, and whichever artist that I sing that, Leonard Cohen is one of those where, you kind of hear that and it just brings, chills to your body. Or, I mean, I used to play the guitar when I was young. So anytime I hear things like any Christmas carols or songs like "Oh Come All Ye Faithful," it brings back those memories, because it's it's one of those formative experiences where you go back, but it puts a smile on your face, and it kind of pushes you to think about not just the moment you're in, but how special those moments were, and how it shaped your life today. So that happens from time to time. I think, it, with the busyness and just the multitude of priorities that I have, sometimes I forget about that. And it's nice to kind of reflect on that. But I think the one thing that I held close is the importance of meditating and reflection. And I do that every day. It doesn't matter, how busy I am. And I think that is a practice that came directly out of my upbringing and being in the church.
Yeah. So again, you went and had this visit to Hamilton. How much of it sounds like a place that felt like home, or else you wouldn't have decided to move there. But is it as welcoming as it seems to us outsiders? It definitely seems like a place that is quite welcoming.
I think it's in the eye of the beholder. I think one of the reasons that I came to Hamilton was because my mom's cousin lived here at the time, and I think for me to get permission to leave the birth home, it was sort of, this would be kind of a place of safety and security, and there would be adults who, of course, would, be able to kind of keep a close watch on me in the event that I decided to go rogue or do something crazy with my life, which of course I didn't. But Hamilton at the time was very much I would call a blue collar sort of industrial town, and it's gone through many iterations. But for me, it was very what I would say multicultural, because that was sort of the term or the phrase that was used at the time. So it felt familiar, and I think that was probably one of the things or the reasons that I was drawn here, because I could see individuals who just by the way they spoke, or the stores and shops that were around, that it offered that sort of home experience. And I think that was one of the reasons. I think the second as well is the university was really the draw, and having that place that I could go to and still have a second home with my relatives made it a good move, versus picking whether another part of the country, or I had been to the United States, but we didn't have family or anyone close that I could potentially go there. So I think for all of those reasons, it just seemed like a good fit, both from a family standpoint, but also from an academic as well.
Sure. So then it was off to the university. And how did you make your choice about the school and course of study and so forth?
Yeah, it's like with many kids, I had all of these different versions of what I wanted to do. I remember at one point, I think I might have been 13 or 14, and I remember getting a chemistry side, and I think I said I wanted to be a pharmacist or a biochemist or something, and I have no idea why I said that or did that. But my choice of study was geography, economic geography, human geography, and economics in general. And I think that was led me to that path, that I wanted to be a planner, and I wanted to kind of have a business context, and the social sciences faculty afforded me that experience. So that was the path that I chose. But what I didn't know was when I entered university, and during my first week, I saw this sign that says alumni and development, and I didn't actually quite know what that meant. But there was a posting that they were looking for students to help with their capital campaign. And I was like, of course, the campaign word drew me in. I thought, oh, I can be part of a campaign, something big. Had no idea it meant fundraising. So I put an application in, and I was interviewed, and I guess I was a good talker then, and I loved people, and I still do. So I got selected, and there I was, calling alumni and sharing the plans, the vision for the university's expansion. And I did that for 6 months, and I did very well, and I sort of excelled and was one of the top student callers. And then I got an invitation to continue in their office to do research. And it was like research on private and public foundations. And again, it was a bit of an eye-opener as a first-year university student, just researching and not knowing exactly what this meant, because it was being passed on to a development officer who I didn't quite understand what their role was. But, here I was doing all of this research, and I loved, and I still do love to research. So, that was kind of how I got into that part. So, there were two converging pieces that were coming together in that first year. Had no idea where it would take me, and how it was so influential in the career that I chose.
What year was this when you were doing all the research? Because research must have looked a little bit different then.
Yeah, it was 1998,
Okay.
1998, 1999. Right. So it was, most definitely. I mean, while there was a computer, because I remember using this clunky sort of desk computer, but there were lots of blue files that, I was going through in a box. And then I would go to the bookshelf, and there were numerous, like encyclopedia-sized books that I would have to retrieve, and then I would meticulously review each name of the foundation and then collect the information. And I would be typing, I would be photocopying pieces, and these like hundreds of files that I would be creating. So that is the experience, the first entree into what we know as prospect research I was doing.
And so you also saw both the value of something like that, which is pretty core to our profession now, but not always utilized fully. I mean, so do you see some differences between then and now in that respect about how people either value or embrace some kind of intelligence about the people who love the same things we do, and so that forms the basis of our outreach to them and getting to know them?
Yeah, I think you either love research or you hate research, but I think generally it gives you that baseline information, and I feel it equips you, and it's a conversation starter. And I always say to my team, even when I was in the role of CEO, I held C-suite roles. I always said to the teams, before I go on a donor visit or I'm going to see a volunteer, I always, as a rule, either go into the donor database and review their profile, or there's something that with the internet or even just whatever technology we have, like LinkedIn, other ways. I do that quick review, and essentially, there are teachable moments where I'm saying, you go in knowing the little things that help you to build the relationship, because fundraising is about friend raising. And when you think of how you can build close relationships, you want to know something about the individuals, whether it's about themselves or their family or where they work. And I think that is the benefit of, the research, when you think of all of the things, of course, about their capacity and their interests, and all those things are important as well. But knowing who the individual is even more important at the end of the day.
Right. And I know that with research now that we both have this incredible breadth of information available to us, but it can sometimes just be really wrong. For example, West Indies are an entirely different place in the world from Nicaragua. So these things happen. But I want to take you back a step, because you said that you were, it sounds like, a phenomenal student caller. That is not necessarily something that everybody falls into easily. So what about that was so appealing to you then? Because it probably also appeals to you now, the ability to get on the phone and talk to a stranger and then welcome them into this idea about supporting a campaign. What was exciting about that for you? What really clicked?
I didn't realize at the time, because it felt right, because one, I was looking for a part-time job that had some flexibility and would pay the bills. But what I was attracted to was the contact, the people contact I could have, and I was eager to learn. So I think for me, what I was attracted to the most is the different experiences of alumni and what they were willing to share with me. Because I learned a host of things, not only about the university, but people open up, because, you say you're a student and you're calling to ask for support. But, I would ask these engaging questions, and it was like a tap, and people shared their experiences. Some were good, some were not good, but that's what I loved the most, because I learned so much. But there's that joy of connecting with individuals, because it feeds your soul. And I think you have to be a people person to enjoy that. And I loved that part of it, and I still do. All the parts, the arts and science of fundraising and relationship building. The arts part is one that it gives you that, it keeps you going. It's that high you get, because there's such rich conversations and stories that people share with you.
And that was just the beginning of this journey. So you started early. A lot of people talk about falling into whatever the career.
Yeah.
It's certainly true for fundraising, but you were starting from, when was this, your freshman or sophomore year?
Yeah, I was, I think I had just turned 18 probably. And yeah, you're absolutely right, Jay. I never had any other jobs, even though I intended to be an urban planner and, pursue a career that was more in economics or an economist. But I fell into this by accident, and I loved it so much that it kind of led to that first job at United Way. And many people talk about United Way as being a training ground. And I believe that the experience at the university gave me that stepping stone to be a development officer at United Way. And then from there, throughout, 2.5 decades, were progressive leadership roles in the philanthropy sector and in truly fundraising. And I think that's unique because, as you said, some people switch careers, others sort of, work through later in their careers. But I've never had any other roles other than in philanthropy and in really bringing mission to life through fundraising.
And the other thing about that is that often people will, there are two schools of action, I guess, more than thought in this. One is that some people stay in positions for a long time, and other people just seem to hop from place to place to place. And there's a lot of debate in the field about this, but you stuck with some of these things for a bit, and obviously with the profession as a whole. What was it that kind of commanded your attention, but also gave you an opportunity to grow into these leadership roles?
I attribute it to two things. I was connected to the mission of the organization. I could feel and breathe the mission on a daily basis. And I think that kept me in some of my roles longer. The second is the mentors and the supervisors that I had. Because, at the end of the day, you often hear that fundraisers stay for maybe 18 months and it's a bit of a revolving door. And some of those factors are due to the workplace culture and the lack of support and the pressure to raise funds quickly, even though the infrastructure isn't there or the donor base isn't fully cultivated, and boards may view fundraisers as, just individuals to produce. But I have stayed on average, some places it's 6 years. The longest I stayed was Hamilton Health Sciences Foundation, where I was the VP of development. And I had a major responsibility in fundraising for major and capital campaigns. There were 5 that was almost back to back. And it was because I loved the mission of the organization. There was never a day that I did not want to go to work. I truly loved that role. And the other part is that the president CEO who I reported to was a great leader and a mentor. And she provided opportunities for me to grow and thrive and shine. And, that is the recipe for success when you think of what attributes great leaders must have. I think that's part of the secret sauce. Otherwise, I would not have stayed. There was no doubt about that. And I feel fortunate that, in the second half of my career, which is like almost 15 years, I worked for 2 organizations, both in healthcare philanthropy, complex organization, multi-site hospitals, major budgets. And, it drew me in, and it drew me in further in a way in which I felt that I was contributing, but more importantly, I was growing. I was growing personally and I was growing professionally.
And you're talking about 2 things now that are huge conversation pieces, again, within the entirety of philanthropy and nonprofit sector as a whole. And one is about culture, as you just talked about. I mean, I guess we should accept that if we agree with the mission, that's one thing that keeps us there. But if the culture is difficult, or if the leadership doesn't provide those opportunities to grow and shine, as you were describing, it might be difficult no matter how much you believe in the mission. So what has been, since it sounds like you've had some very rewarding positions, both personally and also for the communities you were serving, what has been the hardest part in that journey? Especially in healthcare, where the margins tend to be so narrow.
Yeah, I mean, the hardest part, I think, is just the pressure to produce and produce results quickly. And the challenging part on top of that is where you work with individuals, so you have individuals that are not necessarily fully aligned with the mission, or it's seen as a job. And I think that's challenging, in particular where you have great team members, but they're not on the same page as you. So I think the expectations or level of accountability, and individuals who may not have the core competencies or the interest and desire to make a difference as you have, I think that certainly is a challenging aspect when you think about that. And I know for me personally, I've had those challenging experiences, and you really have to think about how, you kind of make magic, and how you bring others to the table, or how you engage differently. Because I think that's also a part where I realized, I think really early in my career, you can't do it alone. So how do you work with individuals who may not have the same drive or interest as you, but they have something to contribute? And I think that's certainly been a big learning, and some of the mentors along the way have helped me. And I think that has certainly, led to some really great team success.
That idea about making magic, that we need an instruction manual for that. If you were writing one about how to make magic in these offices, what are those chief ingredients in that recipe?
Oh gosh, I certainly think you have to build a team culture, one in which everyone has a voice. And I haven't always had that experience where I had a voice, and part of it too is, as a racialized brown individual, sometimes in colonial structures, your voice isn't heard. So I think that's important in terms of how you build a culture where every voice is heard. I think the second aspect is there's the fun in fundraising. And it's important that leaders pay attention to that, and find ways that team members and your staff engage, and you pause, you work hard, but you play hard as well. And I think that is an important ingredient. I think a culture of support. So, having the appropriate infrastructures and the pieces, whether it's a donor database or the technology to enable successful fundraising. Sometimes it not that it only I wouldn't say it gets forgotten, but it isn't prioritized with shrinking budgets. And I think that's an important piece to create a culture where you have the tools you need to be successful. So, those are kind of three things that are top of mind for me when I think of culture and how you build that culture. And I think a culture of success is one where you give individuals permission to make mistakes. So, you can't have a culture where you're constantly making mistakes and making the same mistakes. Because I think that requires a sit down and to say, what's happening. But I think it's perfectly fine to give individuals the opportunity to test or try things, or to be able to fall and learn from that. And I think that is important, because you grow from your mistakes and you become better. And I didn't fully understand or learn that, in the first maybe 5+ years when I was new to fundraising. But as I took leadership roles on and I was mentored, I understood the value and the importance of having people and having team members run with something and doing it in a different way. They may not follow the A to Z the way I did, but I came to appreciate that important lesson over time.
You were talking in that first element of the, about everyone needing a voice, and fun and culture support, all of which are so important, and many of which I know that you are pursuing not just personally and professionally, but through the halls of AFP now in your current role. But that first one, it may be the most challenging, right? Because of what you just talked about, the kind of the racialized and colonial or post-colonial aspect of the waters we swim in, wherever those waters happen to be. So you are currently in Canada. I am in the United States. AFP is a global concern. We have the majority of us, I think, numerically in Canada and the US, but there are members all over the world, right? So when you're tackling this issue about trying to make sure that everybody has a voice, or addressing this, I should say, not tackling it, I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on how you have ensured that the people that you work with have a voice, not only yourself, but especially in Canada, where you are presiding over the major chapter there, and then now in your role at AFP, especially because we are right now at a time when at least the U.S. government has taken steps to try and restrict the use of certain language concerning diversity, equity, and inclusion. And AFP has a strong commitment to IDEA. Now, there are some people who will listen to this who don't know anything about AFP or these acronyms. So I'm going to ask you to do a lot in a short span of time. But can you talk a little bit about your thoughts and feelings on this, both from a personal perspective and professional one, especially as they relate to AFP? How can we tackle this unique moment in time so people have a voice?
Yeah, it is. It's a complex issue, and we can talk hours about it. But what I will say is that AFP has a role and is committed to inclusion, diversity, equity, and access, IDEA. And for me personally, it is part of my commitment as the AFP Global Board Chair to create spaces where people feel like they belong. And I have not always felt that I belong, not just professionally at the C-suite table or with a donor or a volunteer, but there are times within AFP, that I didn't feel like I belong. And I surfaced and I brought this to the forefront because I felt as chair in the 2 years that I am in the role, that I could make a difference. And the Global Board has also committed to doing the work on belonging. And that work is about looking within ourselves, and each board member had the opportunity, and we did that in the last year, to think about how we can create spaces that we belong as a board. And we created a board vision that we would, be able to respect differences of opinion, to be able to unlearn behaviors that do not contribute to belonging, to be able to be aware and invite individuals when we see that they are standing on the sideline and they do not feel like they belong.
So it is a journey that, we have to stay on and not feel rushed or pressured. And as you said, we live in interesting times, but I feel comforted that the board, our global board, reaffirmed our commitment to IDEA. And what that means is that we want to ensure that our actions, because this is not something we are starting. We have been working on IDEA for a long time. It's probably close to a decade. And those who came before me have done a lot of great work and have made personal sacrifices. But I think what we can do in this moment of time is to be brave and courageous and find ways that we include the IDEA, inclusion, diversity, equity, and access principles, even though we might be, directed in a way that it should not show up on your website or be, in your programs. But community and belonging go hand in hand. And if we truly are committed to creating spaces of belonging, then the onus is on us as an individual and collectively as the board as we work through how we make individuals, members, comfortable and feel like they belong. There's no one, I would say, recipe or prescription for success, because I know that we will have to take a tangential path, and there are times we will have to pause and think about that next step, because there may be geopolitical pressures, or there may be situations, for example, in Canada, where the priorities around racial equity is different from the United States. So it definitely is a complex issue as we think of how we can navigate through these choppy waters, as you say. But I'm very committed to that journey of belonging. And I don't think I'd be able to solve everything in the time that I'm chair around belonging. But what I hope that I'm able to do is to be able to have the board as a shining example of what belonging is, and to be able to have chapters and members pause and reflect on the individual roles that we each play to not only identify why we are creating spaces where people don't belong, but how we move the needle to create a community where everyone feels like they belong. And that's a big task to undertake, but it is one that we can actually do, because you will see a cultural shift over time if you have that sea change happening across the board. So that's kind of what I would say is a top priority amongst the other priorities, as chair, and the board's priorities as well.
Yeah. And it sounds like something that you've been thinking about personally and professionally through the halls of AFP and beyond for a long time. But it also sounds like there's a sensitivity on your part and of your colleagues to making this a process where there's continual learning, not only for all the members, but all the leaders within the organization, because everyone's experience is unique and different, not just on a country by country basis, but every member. That leads me to another question, which is organizations themselves, not the individual AFP members, but the organizations, nonprofits might be saying, we really need that kind of leadership to do what maybe National Council of Nonprofits and others have done, sometimes in the courts, sometimes through advocacy. And are they looking to AFP, or do you think that AFP plays a role in advocating for the sector, not only its members, but the organizations, to say, this is why the sector is important, this is why the sector should remain, free to express its views in its own way, in its own language?
Yeah, it absolutely, AFP plays a role in advocating for the importance of the sector, and AFP is also a partner in doing that, whether it's with the National Council of Nonprofits or other strategic partners globally. I was at a convention last week, and global leaders were talking about the importance of defining a narrative on the importance of the role the sector plays and fundraisers play as well. So, part of AFP's role is to educate and provide professional development and uphold ethical standards. But the role that we also play is to be that advocate, and to be able to talk about the importance of the sector and why we are such an important part, the fabric of our society, and what it means to have that strong nonprofit framework. So I think it's something that we do in terms of the advocacy work that we do, whether it's in the United States or in Canada. It also shows up in partnerships and discussions that we have with organizations that have shared missions like ours. So it happens there. And it also happens individually when we take a stand, and that may be, my voice or our CEO's voice. And in bringing that and putting that on the table and elevating the importance of the sector. So it happens in a variety of ways, but we are also very mindful of what members are asking us for, and that is about the support and strength of the sector, and to be able to bring or be that voice. And that is something that we are continually working on, and that we are listening, because I think that requires a level of adapting to the changes that you're seeing in your experiences, and that you have to lean in and to be able to know when, whether it's time to partner with another organization and address the issue of relevance of the sector, or the importance of, an operating grant, that if you didn't have that, how would you be able to stay open? Or the importance of facilitating a conversation about the role of fundraisers, and it's not just measured on quantitative or qualitative, but that glue that brings together mission and the donor desires to make a difference.
Right. There's a lot in there. So for you, when you look ahead and you think about the role of advocacy in all this, maybe even your own personal role in advocacy, what does that look like? What do you imagine for how AFP and you can fight in its own and responsible way for this sector, both in the U.S., obviously in Canada, but globally?
Yeah, it's an evolving discussion, both at AFP and even myself individually. It's one where we have a stronger voice, and to be able to identify the opportunities where we can share the support and to be united. So I think there isn't sort of this defined plan that I can say, well, we'll do A, B, C, and D. But what I can say is that it is something where we know that this is the opportunity for us to lean in and speak on behalf of the sector, or to be able to ramp up our advocacy efforts, because it will change the minds of whether it's a senator or a governor, or someone that we're speaking with, who can actually help us to bring our voice through them. So there are a variety of ways that we can do that. And for myself personally, it is something where I can speak on behalf of AFP, or personally, about the importance of what we do and why we do it as a sector, and on behalf of AFP in particular, because our members are really the fabric of what we do and why we exist. So I think those are maybe some, just, I would say, reflections of what we would continue doing.
And you talked about yourself at the beginning of this conversation today about kind of that being a global citizen, in a sense, or feeling that way, even from the earliest days. I know you have a passion for travel. Maybe that comes from being an early traveler. But also, even in this role, I mean, you're not just making sure to be a support and a leader for people in these two countries, but for all these chapters and all these fundraisers all around the world. So talk about what it means to you to be a global citizen in those contexts today. What does it mean for you to be kind of the person who wants to get out there on the road and talk to people in different places and bring these people of very different experiences together?
Yeah, it means bringing, I would say, a connection for AFP to that chapter or to that group, and it's taking the mission and sharing my personal experience, so that the individuals that are listening can feel a connection with the work that they're doing locally, whether it's in Mexico or some parts of the US or wherever it is in whichever province in Canada, that they see how they fit. And I think that's really the big piece. They fit in AFP and they see that they're part of a AFP is a community. So I think that's what I try to do through storytelling and through sharing our strategic priorities in our new strategic plan that was approved last year, because it is about elevating the member experience and creating alliances in a way that members feel connected. And I think the way you do that is by being real and sharing these experiences and stories so that what they're hearing brings to life what they've read or the experiences that they've had previously. And hopefully that those two come together or there's a closer connection by what I'm sharing and the mere fact that they see that it isn't just something that they've read or received in the mail, but it is a human who is trying to bring that concept or some aspect of what I would call the AFP mission to life. And I think that's really what I intend to do. And it varies. It varies because of the country culture and the way you interact. You know, it might be more formal with a corporate group setting, but if you're around the table with chapter leaders who simply want to have a conversation about the challenges that they're facing on a daily basis and the level of fatigue and the stress that they're feeling. So, you know, it really is about active listening and to be able to provide that sense or that feeling of courage and determination and to encourage individuals to keep going forward. Because, you know, we have to collectively do that. So I think that's a big part of you know, what I am doing and what I hope to do.
And how long is your term?
Yeah, not long enough. It's 2 years, and I started my term in January of 2025. So that the time is ticking. You know, it's almost 6 months. So year and a half left.
And then what's next for you? I mean, where does your roadshow go? You're a person who doesn't just let, you know, the moss grow. So where are you going to go next?
Yeah, you know, I mean, as the immediate past chair, you have specific AFP roles, but I intend to, you know, collaboratively be able to continue this mission, this journey around belonging. So that will continue. You know, I'm engaged with other nonprofit organizations as well. So I hope that work will also be able to influence change. So that is kind of the immediate plans that I have for myself. And who knows what else is in the future.
But no major road trip is planned.
Not that I know of. No, you know, I think the runway for doing that, you know, is between now and the end of next year. And you know, it's just interesting how what you say, people truly listen, because it was in Icon in Seattle that I said to attendees on the big stage that come up and say hello to me, and you know, I want to visit your chapter. And I can't tell you how many people, I think there were over 100 people who came up and said, you know, I heard what you said and I wanted to introduce myself, or I would love for you to come to my chapter. So I think those are opportunities to embrace in the next year and a half, and I'm very much open to doing a lot of that. And I think my interest post being the chair is to be able to lean in even more around global issues of health and climate change, and to be able to lean into that a little bit more. So I'm just sort of waiting for the time that I can just explore those opportunities further.
Well, that's it for this episode of the PM Podcast. You can learn more about the Association of Fundraising Professionals at afpglobal.org. Our thanks to our sponsor, DonorSearch, the world leader in AI-powered fundraising intelligence solutions for the nonprofit world. Our producer is Jack Frost, and our theme music is Moving Out, Moving In by Jay Taylor, and is provided courtesy of Epidemic Sound. If you like what you heard, make sure to subscribe wherever you like to listen. Check out our sister shows, Frontlines of Social Good and How to Raise, and come back next weekend for another conversation with a leader in the world of social good. Until then, this is Jay Frost. Thanks for joining me.